You didn't meet the narcissist for the first time in a romantic relationship. You met them long before that, in the very house where you grew up. Before you ever knew what love was, you had already learned how to please others. Before you understood affection, you knew that to be accepted, you had to stay quiet, be obedient, and hide parts of your true self. In the place that was supposed to be a home, love was traded for compliance. Every smile was a reward, every silence a punishment. And so you became an expert at sensing the atmosphere around you, predicting anger, soothing sadness, as if that were your divine duty. You didn't call it manipulation, you called it family. You didn't realize you were being trained to survive within a narcissistic system, one where affection only existed if you played your role correctly. When your parents themselves had never known healthy love, they unconsciously passed on the old pattern. Love means control, care means possession, and silence means power. And you, the sensitive child, absorbed it all like your first breath. Jung once said that the family is the first God the human soul ever knows. Before we know God, we know our mother and father. A father's gaze becomes the sky where approval defines our worth. A mother's voice becomes the ocean where warmth or coldness determines how we see the world. If those first gods are wounded, the child's soul is wounded too. Love then stops being connection and becomes a test. You learn that if you behaved, your mother would smile. If you made a mistake, your father would withdraw. If you endured, the family would stay at peace. You grew up not as a free individual, but as an extension of other people's emotions. Your sensitivity was not a heavenly gift. It was a survival reflex, a finely tuned mechanism to predict, to avoid, to endure. And over time, you lost the ability to truly feel yourself. But then one day, when your adult relationships began to mirror the same old pattern, when you kept apologizing for things that weren't your fault, when you chose silence just to keep the peace, your soul began to whisper, "Why does love always leave me empty?" That is the first moment of awakening. You realize the first narcissist wasn't the one you dated, but the one who taught you what love was. The one who made you believe that to love is to sacrifice, that to care is to suffer, that to feel safe is to disappear. And from that moment on, your journey home begins the journey of looking back at that old house with awakened eyes, not to blame, but to understand. To understand that real love never makes you smaller, that gentleness is not surrender, and that true compassion always begins with the courage to love yourself. When we are children, we have no ability to separate ourselves from our parents. In a child's eyes, the parents are the universe, the law, the weather, the definition of right and wrong. A father's gaze can become the sky, sometimes filled with the light of approval, sometimes clouded with cold indifference. A mother's voice is the ocean, gentle at times, stormy at others. And you, the small child, learn to navigate your emotions by guessing whether today will bring sunshine or thunder, warmth or chill. If your parents were people who never knew how to love properly, they unconsciously passed down their own pattern of pain. They may have loved you, but that love was mixed with control and fear, with desire and manipulation. They taught you that love means pleasing others, that your emotions must always be reasonable, that silence is safety and obedience is virtue. And so, you grew up inside an emotional system where love meant you were not allowed to be yourself. Imagine a 5-year-old child standing in a quiet room, listening to their parents arguing in the next. Their heart races, fists clenched, eyes fixed on the crack of the door, trying to make sense of what's happening. They learn to listen to tone, to read faces, to predict anger, a tiny prophet in a domestic storm. When one parent finally walks out, the child runs over, hugging, joking, doing anything to calm the tension. That isn't love, it's survival. From that moment, the child begins to build a distorted emotional map. If I'm good enough, kind enough, selfless enough, everyone will be happy. They don't realize that in doing so, they're trading their inner freedom for a fleeting sense of safety. And as years pass, that child grows up, carrying the same pattern into every relationship. They know how to care, to listen, to heal others, but not how to sit quietly with themselves. They can feel another's sadness before a word is spoken, yet remain blind to the exhaustion within their own heart. In psychoanalysis, Jung called this the creation of the persona, the social mask we wear to be accepted. On an unconscious level, the child signs an invisible contract. I won't disappoint anyone again as long as I'm loved. Every word of praise, every approving glance from a parent becomes emotional currency traded for safety. Every criticism, silence, or cold stare becomes punishment that teaches fear. And over time, the child stops living and starts performing. If the father is a power-oriented narcissist, the child learns that love equals submission. If the mother is an emotional narcissist, the child learns that love means soothing, saving, enduring. Gradually, the child becomes an extreme empath, someone who can feel everything but no longer knows what belongs to them. The structure of a narcissistic family, as Jung and many psychoanalysts describe, operates like a hidden religion. One god rules and demands worship, often the dominant parent. One silent disciple maintains the image of harmony, usually the other spouse. And the children are assigned roles. The golden child, who mirrors the parent's perfection. The scapegoat, who carries the family's guilt. And the empath child, the one who heals everyone but themselves. The empath raised in such an environment carries a sacred lie, that suffering is proof of love. Every time you endure, you feel noble. Every time you stay silent, you feel kind. Every time you sacrifice, you feel needed. But it's not love, it's emotional servitude disguised as virtue. Love in that system is never a true gift. It's an exchange. You do right, you are loved. You express need, you are ignored. You rebel, you are called ungrateful. So you learn to silence your own voice. You live inside an artificial harmony, a family theater where everyone knows their lines. On the outside, it looks like a happy family. Inside, it's a stage filled with lonely souls. But the most frightening part isn't other people's manipulation. It's when you start manipulating yourself. You learn to say, I'm fine, when everything is collapsing. You smile while your heart trembles. You make excuses for others to keep the peace, then hate yourself for feeling hurt. This deception isn't born of malice, but of fear of losing love, being abandoned, having no one to hold on to. From those years within a narcissistic system, a sophisticated survival mechanism begins to take shape, what people later call extraordinary empathy. Others may see you as sensitive, compassionate, unconditionally loving, but only you, if you're honest, know the truth. Behind that ability lies an ancient fear. Fear of disappointing, of making someone sad, of being seen as a burden, of being unloved. The child who lived within others' emotional weather had no choice but to develop emotional antennas to detect danger. Every sigh, every frown, every shift in tone became an alarm. Over time, the nervous system became a refined radar. You can sense sorrow in silence, hear the unsaid in someone's eyes, and detect deceit before it's spoken. But ironically, the better you read others, the further you drift from yourself. Carl Jung once wrote, "The greater the light, the greater the shadow. Your sensitivity, the light of your soul, exists only because you once lived too long in darkness." No one feels others' pain so deeply unless they've known the absolute loneliness of their own. That's why your empathy isn't just a gift, it's the imprint of an ancient wound carved on your heart by both love and fear. As an adult, you start using this gift to help others, believing it's your purpose. You become the one everyone turns to, the listener, the comforter, the healer. You tell yourself it's love, but deep down you're replaying the old rescue pattern that once kept your childhood home from falling apart. You don't save people because they're weak, you save them because you're terrified they'll collapse, and if they do, your inner world might collapse too. In therapy, this is called the compassion trap, the snare of empathy. You give not because you have abundance, but because guilt haunts you if you don't. You listen not because you have space, but because silence makes you anxious. You say yes not out of desire, but because you don't know how to say no and still feel like a good person. And slowly, you burn out not because you love too much, but because you love in the wrong direction. Sensitivity, once a survival instinct, becomes a spiritual burden when left untransformed. You live so deeply in others' emotions that the line between me and them disappears. When someone is sad, you feel guilty. When someone is angry, you feel afraid. When someone is disappointed, you feel responsible. And when someone leaves, you feel unworthy. You live as a mirror, reflecting everyone's wounds, not realizing that each reflection costs you another fragment of yourself. The world may call you a heart of gold, but only you know there's a tired child inside a child who never got comfort, only learned to comfort others. That child carries the unspoken emotions of everyone: the mother's sorrow, the father's anger, the sibling's anxiety, and the silence of adults who never apologized. Each emotion is like a small stone, piling up through the years until you feel nothing, not because you're healed, but because you're numb. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And so you keep attracting people who need saving, those who carry wounds that mirror your families. You get drained not because you're foolish, but because your subconscious is trying to complete the old circle. It believes that if you love enough, deeply enough, patiently enough this time, maybe you'll finally be loved back. But real love is never a reward for endurance. It only blooms in awareness and freedom. What makes the empath extraordinary is not their sensitivity, but their astonishing capacity to endure pain. They can stand in the middle of someone else's emotional storm and still smile. They can calm chaotic souls with voices soft as water. But because they've lived so long in the storm, they no longer recognize when the sky has cleared. They carry an invisible fear of emptiness, the fear that if there's no one left to save, they will no longer have a purpose. And so they tie their self-worth to rescuing others. They become the therapist, the confidant, the healer, the one who understands. Yet inside, they are achingly lonely. No one truly understands them, because they are always the listener. No one truly reaches them, because they hide behind the role. They carry a vast heart, but no shelter to rest it in. Yet it is within that very contradiction that a seed of awareness begins to awaken. For the human soul, no matter how wounded, still carries within it an instinct to return to truth. One day, you look at yourself in the mirror and realize, why do I always attract people who are in pain? Or why must I always be the strong one? That is when the darkness within begins to speak. Jung called it the call of the shadow, the invitation from the rejected part of the soul. It tells you that compassion does not have to mean sacrifice, that you can love without saving, that you can care without dissolving into another's pain. But to reach that place, you must dare to look into the root of your goodness, where you first learned that loving others was the condition for your survival. This is the hardest stage, distinguishing between love that is real and love that is born of fear. True love comes from fullness. It gives without needing to be returned. Fear-based love comes from scarcity. It gives to be validated. And you, the empath, have lived far too long inside the second kind. When you begin to set boundaries, those who have benefited from your endurance will become angry. They will call you selfish, cold, or changed. But that is merely the natural reaction of those who once mistook your compassion for their entitlement. They do not understand that refusing to be drained is not cruelty, it is the first act of real love. And then, one day, you discover something simple yet profound. Your ability to feel others is not destiny, it is choice. You can choose to sense without absorbing, to listen without merging, to help without carrying. In that moment, your empathy ceases to be a wound and becomes soul wisdom. A true empath is not the one who suffers for others, but the one who knows how to walk through pain and still remain kind. They do not save people. They reflect truth. They do not perform miracles. They transmit light. And in that, kindness is no longer a trap. It becomes an art of living. In that moment, you will understand that the greatest gift pain ever gave you was not suffering, but the ability to perceive the essence of love itself. Love is not merging. It is space for two beings to be fully themselves. It is not an unconditional yes, but a respectful no born of self-worth. It is not the art of calming every storm, but the courage to stand still within it. And when you look back, you'll see that every pain, every loss, every time you were used or misunderstood, all were lessons of the soul, teaching you to move from reaction to awareness, from fear to understanding, from sacrifice to freedom. This is the rebirth of the empath when they no longer live to soothe the world, but to reflect their own light. When we finally understand the origin of empathy, that it was never a divine gift but a survival reflex, we begin to look back at our old home with new eyes. Then the things we once called normal suddenly appear hauntingly clear, because now you see that the house was never just walls, a roof, and laughter. It was an emotional religion where each person had a role and the only sacred ritual was obedience. A narcissistic family does not run on truth, but on image. Outwardly, it glows with harmony, virtue, and pride. Inside, it is built on fear, guilt, and control. Each member plays a part in an unconscious drama. One leads, one submits, and the children learn to perform the right script in order to be loved. Truth is never spoken, it is encoded in silence. And over time, silence becomes the official language of the system. The leader, often the narcissistic parent, plays the role of the god of the household. They are not demons. They too were once unloved children. But because they never learned to endure emptiness, they built a throne out of admiration. They need others to see them as perfect, for within them lies an abyss of shame. Every compliment is a brick reinforcing the mask of power. Every act of defiance is a dagger threatening their imaginary kingdom. Thus, anyone in the house who dares to speak the truth is branded a traitor. The other parent, often their partner, becomes the guardian of the illusion. It might be the quiet mother who endures, or the gentle father who fades into the background. They maintain the appearance of peace by closing their eyes to reality, masking abuse with smiles, and avoiding conflict through pity. To them, stability matters more than justice, and everything's fine becomes their daily prayer. But the price of that fragile peace is the bending of each child's soul. And then it's your turn, the child in that house, to step up to the altar of that emotional religion. Here, there are no real deities, only roles that are worshipped. If you are chosen as the golden child, you become the mirror reflecting your parents' perfection. You are loved because you make them feel extraordinary. Your mistakes are forgiven not out of mercy, but because their image is tied to your success. You are not allowed to be weak, not allowed to be real, because truth could damage the pretty picture. If you are the scapegoat, the child who is criticized, misunderstood, and blamed, you become the vessel for everything unacknowledged. All the adults' shame, anger, and disappointment are poured into you. They call you rebellious, selfish, ungrateful. But in reality, you are simply the only one who dares to react to the falsehood. You are the mirror of the family's shadow, the part they refuse to face. And so you are exiled from the religion, not by action, but by the chill of silence. And if you are the empath child, you become the emotional priest of that temple. You reconcile, soothe, and mend. You apologize on behalf of arguments, cry for those who cannot cry, and smile so others feel less alone. In their eyes, you are the good child, the sensible child, the child who never complains. But inside, you are the loneliest watchman. You keep the system from collapsing, even as you are the only one who knows it has been dead for a long time. Living in that structure long enough, you begin to believe the role is your true self. You can no longer tell where real feeling ends and duty begins. Each time you feel sad, you immediately scold yourself for being unreasonable. Each time you feel angry, you rush to apologize so as not to upset anyone. You have been trained to feel guilty whenever you dare to be authentic. Over time, that guilt becomes an invisible chain that fastens you to the old door. Jung once said, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. They use their children to complete the unfinished parts of their own lives, making the next generation carry the hopes, fears and shame they never had the courage to face. You inherit not only their genes, but also their unfulfilled dreams and unlit darkness. And while they think they are teaching you how to be a good person, they are really teaching you to continue their unawakened dream. Narcissistic families talk endlessly about love, but what they truly transmit is power. Who is right, who is wrong, who is worthy, who is not, who may speak, who must be silent. They may never raise a fist, yet their words cut like knives. A single cold sentence can slice a child's heart deeper than any wound. I only want what's best for you, they say, while their eyes are full of contempt. I'm just teaching you to be a proper person, they say, as they strip you of your feelings. This is psychological violence, veiled in morality and the language of love. The most frightening thing about emotional abuse is that it leaves no blood. It hides in mealtimes, in lessons, in expectations. A child raised in such an environment doesn't know they're being hurt. They only know that whenever they cry, no one listens. Whenever they speak, no one believes. Whenever they're happy, someone else grows sad. Slowly, they learn to suppress everything. They learn that true feeling is dangerous. And when they grow up, they no longer know what a true feeling is. Strangely, those who grow up in such environments are often praised by society. They are polite, considerate, resilient, always putting others first. No one knows that behind that sturdy posture is a soul bleeding in silence. Others call it emotional maturity, when in fact it is the callous of the soul. When you begin to awaken, the first thing you feel is not peace but profound disorientation. Realizing that the people you loved and trusted most were the first to teach you to forget yourself is a deep shock. You don't know whether to be angry or compassionate. You want to run, yet also stay to save them. Because even though they hurt you, you still see their hurt. And that very compassion traps you once again. This is the emotional karmic loop that Jung called the path of shadow, where victim and perpetrator dance in the same unconscious pattern. The narcissist manipulates to avoid facing their inner void, while the empath rescues to avoid facing their loneliness. Both are ruled by their own darkness. But there will come a moment, small, quiet, yet decisive, when you stop. You sit in the old room, look at the photos on the wall, listen to the wind at the window, and for the first time in your life you ask, who am I when I am no longer the good child, the healer, the peacemaker? That question, simple as it sounds, is the thunderclap of the soul. For the instant you ask it, you break a sacred rite of the family religion, the rite of silence. You are no longer complicit. You stop performing. You begin to step away from the altar of illusion, and the system built on obedience begins to tremble. The family narcissist will feel threatened. They will accuse you of being ungrateful, a traitor, someone who has forgotten their roots. But in truth, you are not betraying anyone, you are betraying the lie. You are not abandoning your family, you are abandoning its false image. You are not lacking love. You are refusing the kind of love that requires you to disappear in order to exist. This is the beginning of sacred separation, the first step on the individuation path Jung described. And paradoxically, it is precisely when you dare to leave that you become truly capable of loving again. Because real love cannot spring from obligation. It blooms only in freedom and truth. From here, the house is no longer your prison, but a mirror for awareness. You see that every role has a reason. The controller, because they fear chaos. The silent one, because they fear conflict. The empath, because they fear disconnection. And when you see this, your anger begins to dissolve. Not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve freedom. And in that moment you grasp a strange truth. The house that once confined you becomes a temple of insight. It teaches you your first lesson about darkness so that you can carry light into the world. No one is truly prepared for that moment when the mask of the loving family begins to crack and you glimpse what lies beneath, that the love you believed in, protected, and shed tears for was never truly love. It was an unconscious covenant. You will be loved as long as you obey. You will be accepted as long as you don't make anyone uncomfortable. When that truth breaks open, your inner world breaks with it. What follows is not mere anger, it is a tremor through the soul. Like someone waking from a long spell, you no longer know where you stand. Everything familiar is distorted. Love, once your guiding star, becomes a question. If true love is not obedience, then what is it? The question is simple yet terrifying because it pulls you away from everything once considered right. In the early days of awakening, you often feel more guilt than freedom. Your mind is still programmed to believe that saying no is wrong, setting limits is selfish, and distance is betrayal. You ask yourself, am I being too harsh? Am I hurting them? But deep within, another voice, small, gentle, persistent, begins to speak. No, this is not cruelty. This is truth. Truth, as Jung described it, comes with a symbolic death, the death of the old ego, of the belief that you must do something to be loved. In this process, many empaths experience a profound, invisible grief. They are not only losing a relationship, they are losing an old identity. No longer the soother, no longer the savior, no longer the good one in others' eyes, and that is a kind of spiritual funeral. You begin to realize that through all those years, you were never truly loving. You were performing a duty. You loved to keep the peace, loved to stay in control, loved to feel valuable. Each kindness, each endurance, each understanding was a desperate attempt to keep your world from collapsing. And when that is exposed, you no longer know who you are. Jung said, until you become conscious of your patterns, they will rule your life and you will call it fate. When you start to see these patterns clearly, the old fate loses its grip. But seeing is one thing, accepting is another. You must face the truth that the love you worshipped may have been distorted by power, fear, and the need to control. And then you see that the family narcissist, whether father, mother, or another, is also a wounded soul, seeking a sense of control to avoid falling into the chasm of inner emptiness. You cannot forgive at once, but you begin to understand. That understanding does not come from logic, but from the deepest intuition of the soul. They acted this way because they knew no other way to live. In that moment, a new space opens within you, a sacred stillness, where you begin to realize that true love needs no conditions. It doesn't come from submission, but from presence. It isn't built on making others happy, but on accepting both the light and the shadow within yourself. True love is not soft or weak. It demands courage, the courage to speak the truth even if it means someone may leave, the courage to face your own fears without running away, the courage to stand in the light of your being, even when that light makes others uncomfortable. One of the first signs of real love is that you no longer feel the need to prove anything. You no longer strive to be understood, praised, or loved. You simply wish to be real. You start choosing silence over arguments, withdrawal over explanations, honesty over fake harmony. And in that quiet, you hear something you never heard before your own voice. You realize that peace doesn't come from everyone around you being happy. It comes from no longer depending on their reactions. When someone is angry, you no longer feel responsible for soothing them. When someone is disappointed, you no longer feel guilty. When someone leaves, you no longer see it as proof that you are not enough. The nature of love within you changes from shrinking to please others to expanding in self-respect. There is a stage in this journey that feels profoundly lonely. You begin to drift away from those once close to you, not out of hatred, but because your energies no longer align. They still want you to play your old role, the tolerant one, the listener, the compliant one. When you stop fulfilling that, they react with anger, disappointment, even slander. But you no longer feel the urge to defend yourself. You understand that each time you do not react, you are taking your power back. You learn that silence is also a language of love, but love for yourself. Silence, not to punish anyone, but to stop feeding what is false. Silence, not because you are weak, but because you are strong enough to release without needing an apology. Silence, because now you no longer seek safety in others, you find it within your own being. In therapy, this moment is called the rupture of illusion, the sacred heartbreak. It feels like tearing apart, yet it is the true moment of liberation. Because when the illusion of love collapses, truth can finally enter. You begin to see every relationship in a new light. No one owes anyone endurance. No one has the right to control another through guilt, and no one is obligated to make anyone else happy. You understand that love does not mean agreement, it means respect for boundaries. Love is not sacrificing yourself to keep someone from leaving, it is giving them freedom, even the freedom to go. And paradoxically, only when you allow others that freedom does love between you become real. At this stage, you start to feel a new kind of strength, the power of conscious detachment. You no longer need to control, nor do you allow anyone to control you. You observe instead of absorbing. You love without drowning. You help without carrying. You listen while maintaining your inner boundaries. And in that state, you experience something you may never have known before: peace. True love, it turns out, is quiet. It doesn't need proof or sacrifice to exist. It is the pure energy of understanding. I see you, I understand you, but I do not need to disappear to love you. When you reach that state, you realize you never really needed to be loved by anyone. You only needed the freedom to love authentically. And then you begin to forgive. Not because others deserve it, but because you are tired of carrying the weight. Forgiveness here is not absolution, it is release. When you see that your parents, your lovers, even the narcissist, were all merely reenacting what they themselves were taught by generations before them, your heart softens. You no longer see them as enemies, but as participants in a collective tragedy, one you are now choosing to end. True awakening does not happen in a moment of triumph, but in a quiet afternoon when you look back at everything and whisper, I no longer need to prove anything. From that moment, a new kind of love rises deeper, quieter, and more enduring. Love is no longer a negotiation between two fears, but a meeting between two free souls. You begin to see life as a series of reflections. Everyone you meet teaches you something about yourself. The controlling teach you about boundaries. The ungrateful teach you about expectations. The shallow teach you about depth. And the first narcissist, your parent, your kin, was your greatest teacher, showing you that love cannot exist without awareness. Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You have done that. You looked into the darkness of the place once called home and realized that it was what paved the way for your light. From now on, you no longer love to feel safe. You love because you have become safe within yourself. You no longer need others to reflect your worth. You can look into the mirror and see it without anyone's approval. Love is no longer a wound. It becomes a testament to freedom. And so the journey away from the old house doesn't end with a slammed door, but with gentle light streaming through the window. You walk away carrying no hatred, only understanding. And as that light touches you, you realize something simple yet profound. Love is not endurance. Love is the freedom to be yourself.